"Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" my husband Andrew asked, his smile strained and unnatural. Seated at my sister-in-law Rebecca's lavish dining table for our monthly brunch, I stared at the steaming cup before me, the faint metallic scent setting off every alarm in my mind. At 29, I never imagined I'd be questioning whether my own husband was trying to poison me, but after 3 years of marriage and far too many unexplained illnesses, always after meals prepared by Rebecca, I had learned to be cautious. She had a talent for playing the innocent hostess while orchestrating situations that left me sick or humiliated, her smirk barely concealed behind polite conversation. "How thoughtful of you," I replied, forcing a smile as I studied their expressions. The last time I'd fallen ill was after drinking tea at Rebecca's house, and now, as she absent-mindedly stirred her own untouched coffee, she remarked, "Andrew has been practicing different brewing methods just for you." Her emphasis sent a chill down my spine. I had noticed Andrew spending more time at her house, claiming they were planning a surprise for our anniversary. Yet their hushed conversations and the suspicious texts on his phone painted a different picture. Lifting the cup, I pretended to sip, observing as their gazes flickered between me and the drink. A plan formed in my mind. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick call," I announced, feigning urgency. As I passed Rebecca, I stumbled, swapping our cups in the process. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, masking my intent behind clumsy charm. Rebecca dismissed it with a tight smile, and I hurried to the study, positioning myself where I could see the dining table. My heart pounded as she lifted the cup, took a sip, then another. Seconds later, her hands trembled, her complexion paled. "Andrew?" she rasped, panic creeping into her voice. "Something's wrong." Andrew's face drained of color as he realized the mistake. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered. But in the silence of the room, it carried like a confession. Rebecca's body convulsed, her breathing erratic. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, clutching the table. My phone was already in my hand, recording. 911, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive, I said, my voice steady. "My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee." Rebecca turned wild eyes to me. "You switched it? You knew?" The sirens wailed in the distance. "Yes," I replied evenly, "and I have proof." James recoiled as I played the recording of their hushed conversations, their careful planning to sabotage my career by keeping me sick. The paramedics rushed in, but my evidence was already secured. At the hospital, tests confirmed the presence of toxins, compounds Andrew had stolen through a pharmaceutical connection. When Detective Sinclair arrived, I handed over the messages I had secretly saved, their damning words, implicating them both. "We just needed her to slow down," Rebecca had once texted Andrew. "One more time and she won't make it to the Henderson presentation." The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor unveiled their plan, gradually poisoning me, increasing the dosages, all to eliminate competition. When the guilty verdict was read, neither of them could look at me. A year later, I stood before a packed auditorium, delivering the keynote speech at a prestigious business conference, the same success they had tried to steal from me. As I signed a new multi-million-dollar contract, a news article announced that Rebecca and Andrew had begun their prison sentences. I didn't bother reading it. The best revenge wasn't in their downfall, it was in my triumph, in proving that no matter how hard they tried to take me down, I had risen higher than ever before. 2 months ago, I landed in the hospital after breakfast at Rebecca and Andrew's house, with doctors baffled by an unidentified substance in my system. Andrew, ever the manipulator, dismissed it as a reaction to expired medication, and everyone believed him, except me. Now, standing in the doorway of Rebecca's dining room, I watched her take another sip of the coffee meant for me, oblivious to the switch I had made moments earlier. The metallic scent still clung to the air, making my stomach churn. Andrew typed on his phone, unconcerned, but a tremor in Rebecca's hand caught my attention. She set the cup down abruptly, her face turning pale. "Andrew," she croaked, her voice laced with panic, "something's wrong." His head snapped up, his confusion morphing into horror as he realized what had happened. Jumping up so fast he knocked over his chair, he rushed to her side. "Rebecca, what did you put in that coffee?" he asked, his voice shaking. But I already knew. I had spent years enduring unexplained sickness, missed crucial meetings, and watched my career suffer under suspicious circumstances. Now, I had undeniable proof. Stepping out of the study, I held up my phone, recording everything. Rebecca collapsed to the floor, her body racked with tremors. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," Andrew whispered, but the dining room was deathly silent, his words cut through like a confession. Rebecca's eyes widened in terror as she gasped, "Call an ambulance." I dialed 911, my voice steady despite the chaos. "My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to something in her coffee." As I spoke, Rebecca's gaze locked onto mine, her usual cold, calculating expression replaced by raw fear. "Victoria," she choked out. "You switched it? You knew?" I met her panicked stare, my silence confirming everything. Andrew's breathing grew frantic. "Rebecca, stay with me," he begged. "This wasn't supposed to." "Shut up, Andrew," she spat, her fury momentarily overtaking her pain. "This is your fault. You swore it would only make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." My blood turned to ice. The board meeting, where I was set to present my proposal for a multi-million-dollar contract, the same account Rebecca had been vying for at our rival firms. The pieces clicked together. "The tea last month," I said, my voice eerily calm. "The breakfast 2 months ago. Those weren't accidents, were they?" Rebecca groaned, clutching her stomach. "The tea was meant to keep you home during the Johnson contract pitch," she admitted, her voice slurring. "But you went anyway." She gasped for air. "Andrew said we just needed to discredit you, make clients think you were unreliable." The wail of sirens grew louder, flashing red lights filling the room. Andrew stumbled backward, hands raised as if to distance himself from the unraveling disaster. "Rebecca, stop talking," he hissed, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't know what you're saying." But Rebecca, weakened and cornered, wasn't done. Her lips curled into a sneer even as her body convulsed. "We planned this for months," she rasped. "Ever since Victoria started outshining me at every client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it today." Her confession was damning, and I had every second recorded. The front door burst open, paramedics flooding in, but I barely moved, my grip tightening around my phone. They had spent months trying to poison my career, my reputation, my life. Now, their own actions had poisoned them instead. The paramedics stormed through the front door as I stepped aside, allowing them to work. As they secured Rebecca onto a stretcher, I calmly stopped my recording, sent the video to my private email and lawyer, and turned to Andrew, whose face had gone slack with horror as his perfectly orchestrated scheme crumbled before him. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I informed the paramedics, my voice steady. "After all, I want to make sure my dear sister-in-law gets the treatment she needs." I met Andrew's panicked gaze and added, "And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee." At Nashville General, the emergency room buzzed with frantic movement as doctors worked to stabilize Rebecca. I sat in the waiting room, gripping my phone, replaying the recording of her confession, her shaking voice, the fear creeping into her eyes, the undeniable proof that this was no paranoia on my part. "Family of Rebecca Anderson?" a nurse called out, and I stood, noting Andrew's conspicuous absence. He had mumbled something about parking the car 20 minutes ago and hadn't returned. "I'm her sister-in-law," I answered, following her through the double doors. "How is she?" The nurse's expression darkened. "She's stable, but we found concerning levels of toxins in her system. The doctor would like to speak with you." Dr. Harrison, a tall, sharp-eyed woman with graying hair, was waiting outside Rebecca's room. "Mrs. Bennett," she began, "can you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" I took a measured breath and pulled out my phone. "I think you should listen to this first." As I played the recording from brunch, I watched her professional composure shift into alarm. "This is very serious," she murmured, making notes. "The substance we found isn't something that just happens to end up in coffee. This was deliberate contamination." Before I could respond, Andrew appeared at the end of the hallway, pale and sweating, clearly having overheard her. "Christina," he started, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Let me explain." Dr. Harrison pressed the nurse's call button. "Security to room 4-1-2, she announced firmly. Andrew's hands shot up in surrender. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, Rebecca was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. I scoffed. Really? I tapped my phone, pulling up the text messages I had discovered on his weeks ago, the same ones I had secretly forwarded to myself. So, these messages between you and Rebecca about making sure I was out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just friendly conversation. The blood drained from his face. You went through my phone? His voice wavered. After I found the strange pills in your desk drawer? Yes, I did. I turned to Dr. Harrison. Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the last 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Rebecca's system today. Her eyes narrowed as she nodded. We'll need to run some tests to compare. She turned to the security guards, who had positioned themselves on either side of Andrew. Make sure Mr. Bennett remains available for questioning. Andrew looked trapped, his carefully curated facade crumbling by the second. Rebecca and I, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. We were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard, taking all the big clients. Rebecca said if we could just make you take some time off. I clenched my fists, my voice steady despite the fury boiling inside me. By poisoning me. He swallowed hard, searching for words. How long have you been doing this? I demanded. Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too? His silence was the only answer I needed. Beyond. Andrew, I could see Rebecca lying in her hospital bed, connected to monitors. Her earlier arrogance replaced with the unmistakable fear of someone whose carefully constructed schemes had finally collapsed. Detective, Morgan is on her way, Dr. Harrison informed me quietly. She'll want statements from everyone involved. I nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of calm. The truth was finally coming to light, and there was no turning back. Within the hour, Detective Morgan arrived, her presence commanding the sterile hospital corridor. A seasoned investigator, she listened intently as I played the damning recording from brunch, then reviewed the text messages between Andrew and Rebecca. Mrs. Bennett, she said, scanning her notes. You mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents? I pulled out my phone, opening a meticulously documented file I had been compiling for months. The first was in February after dinner at Rebecca's house, severe stomach pains and dizziness. The second in April, after I drank tea at her home, then in June, after breakfast with them. My voice remained steady as I detailed each incident, the symptoms eerily similar yet different enough that doctors had struggled to identify a cause. Detective Morgan's sharp gaze flickered between my notes. And you've been keeping records? I hesitated before reaching into my purse and retrieving a second phone. Once I noticed the pattern, yes. I even started carrying a backup phone with a different number to record conversations when I was around them. I scrolled through my files. I have several recordings where Rebecca and Andrew discuss their plans, careful but incriminating. I tapped one, and Nina's voice filled the space. The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough. Andrew's response followed, sending a chill down my spine even now. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Morgan's expression hardened as she listened. I glanced toward Rebecca's hospital room. She was awake now, but far from the confident woman she had been at brunch. The hospital is running toxicology screens, the detective said. Dr. Harrison has already identified substances that don't occur naturally. We'll need samples from your home as well. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted down the hall. Andrew was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising with desperation. I need to speak with my wife, he shouted, his frantic eyes locking onto mine. Christina, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Detective Morgan stepped between us. Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We already have evidence of premeditated? Andrew let out a hollow, humorless laugh, the sound bouncing off the sterile walls. We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Rebecca said if we could just make her take some time off. By poisoning her? Detective Morgan's voice was sharp, cutting through his frantic defense like a blade. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. Andrew's face turned ashen. Murder? No, that's not. We never meant to. I took a step forward, my voice chillingly calm. Then what exactly did you mean to do, Andrew? His mouth opened, but no words came. His silence spoke louder than any denial. Through the glass window of her hospital room, Rebecca was watching, her expression a twisted mixture of fear and calculation, as if already scheming her next move. But there would be no escape this time. The truth was out, and they had both lost. I watched Rebecca, wondering if she was already calculating a way to twist this, to reframe months of systematic poisoning as some desperate, misguided attempt to help me. But there was no escaping the truth now. "We'll need both of their phones," Detective Morgan instructed the security guards. "And post officers at both doors. No one leaves until we get the toxicology results." Dr. Harrison entered Rebecca's hospital room, her expression unreadable as she scanned her tablet, Detective Morgan. And I followed, leaving Andrew restrained outside with the guards. Rebecca tried to sit up straighter, but the tremors still rattled her frame. "The toxicology report shows elevated levels of multiple substances," Dr. Harrison stated clinically. "Most concerning is a compound used in pharmaceutical testing, something the general public should never have access to." Rebecca's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Andrew said it was just something mild." "Mild, Detective?" Morgan snapped, flipping open her notebook. "Like the symptoms your sister-in-law has been experiencing for the past 6 months?" The door swung open and another detective entered, holding up an evidence bag. "We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at Anderson Marketing," he reported, presenting several small bottles labeled with chemical names alongside handwritten notes detailing dosages and reactions. My stomach twisted as the realization sank in. "You were documenting everything." My voice barely hid the disgust. "Like some kind of experiment?" Rebecca shook her head weakly, her voice trembling. "It wasn't like that. We had to track what worked. The first doses weren't strong enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway." "So, you increased the dosage," Detective Morgan finished, examining the bottles. "Did you even know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations?" Silence thickened the room. Outside the window, Andrew had slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, the weight of what they had done finally sinking in. I exhaled, slowly the final puzzle piece clicking into place. "The Henderson account," I murmured. "This wasn't just about the presentation, was it? You wanted me out of the way permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead." Rebecca's face twisted, a mix of rage and fear. "You were ruining everything," she spat. "I built that portfolio for years and then you showed up and suddenly everyone wanted to work with you instead." My blood turned to ice. "And Andrew said he could fix it?" My words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Rebecca opened her mouth, but Dr. Harrison cut her off, her voice cold and measured. "The concentration in the coffee you drank today was significantly higher than any previous samples we analyzed from your past hospital visits," she stated, looking directly at Rebecca. "Had you consumed it, the results would have been severe, possibly fatal." Detective Morgan turned to the other officer. "We'll need full warrants for their homes and offices. And get in touch with the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. We need to know how they got their hands on these substances." Rebecca slumped against her pillows, the fight leaving her body. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. Andrew said, "We just needed one more try." My breath came slow and steady as I stepped toward her, my voice calm despite the tremor in my hands. "Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were both there watching, taking notes, measuring how your poison affected me." My voice dropped to a whisper. "What kind of people does that make you?" The silence was suffocating. Outside, I heard Andrew being read his rights as more officers arrived, their voices firm and unwavering. Rebecca didn't look at me. She just stared at her hands, as if searching for the excuse that would make all of this disappear. But there was none. Not anymore. "Detective," I said, turning away from my sister-in-law, "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial lasted 3 grueling weeks, though it felt like years. Every day, I sat in the courtroom as the prosecution meticulously unraveled Andrew and Rebecca's scheme, presenting an airtight case built on overwhelming evidence. The bottles recovered from Andrew's office, the meticulous notes documenting each poisoning attempt, the recorded conversations and text messages that left no room for doubt. Yet, what struck me most wasn't just the evidence, but their demeanor. Rebecca, once polished and poised, looked small and hollow in her defendant's chair. Andrew, unable to meet my gaze, kept his eyes fixed on the floor as expert witnesses detailed the toxic effects of the substances they had been slipping into my food and drinks. Dr. Harrison's testimony was particularly damning, laying out a detailed analysis of how the dosages had been systematically increased over time, demonstrating clear and deliberate intent to cause harm. The final blow came when a representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed that Andrew had stolen the compounds through a college friend working in their research department. This was not just corporate sabotage, the prosecutor declared in her closing argument. This was a calculated, systematic attempt to eliminate Mrs. Bennett, escalating to a level that could have been fatal. When the verdict was read, I felt no satisfaction, only relief. Both Andrew and Rebecca were found guilty on multiple charges, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words rang through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demands the maximum sentence. I watched as they were led away in handcuffs, thinking about how greed and jealousy had turned two people I once trusted into something unrecognizable. Their business, their reputations, and their freedom, everything they had schemed for, were now gone, sacrificed in their attempt to destroy me. A year later, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, preparing to deliver the keynote speech, an opportunity Rebecca had once tried to steal from me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Henderson account, which she and Andrew had been so desperate to sabotage me for, had instead propelled my career forward, securing major clients and establishing me as one of the top marketing executives in the region. As I looked out at the crowd, I spoke with conviction. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, it's about integrity. It's about building genuine relationships based on trust. I let the words settle before adding, sometimes the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us, but surviving those challenges only makes us stronger. After the speech, young professionals approached me, eager for advice. One woman, her eyes shining with ambition, asked how I had managed to stay composed through such an ordeal. I focused on what I could control, I told her. I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to let fear stop me. Later that evening, I received an email from the Henderson client, confirming they were renewing their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, thinking of how differently things might have ended had I not trusted my gut that day at brunch. That morning, a local paper had run an article on Andrew and Rebecca beginning their prison sentences, but I didn't bother reading it. Instead, I turned my attention to a new client proposal, knowing that the best revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about moving forward and thriving, despite those who had tried to hold me back.